They thought the Montana blizzard would be just another tragedy, until a lonely veteran and his German shepherd ran into the storm when everyone else stayed inside. What they brought back wasn't just a family. It was a miracle that melted the snow and the silence in his heart. This story will change the way you see courage, faith, and the power of God's timing. If you think you've seen every kind of hero, wait until you witness what one man and his loyal dog did when the world was frozen in fear. Don't blink. Don't look away. Because this Thanksgiving, a single act of love will remind us all that God still works through loyal hearts, and miracles still walk on four paws. Snow drifted across the Montana highlands, each flake glinting like a fragment of glass under a dim sky. The wind howled through the pines that ringed a lonely cabin, half buried in white. Inside, the air hummed with the faint crackle of a wood fire and the soft breathing of a man who had forgotten what warmth truly felt like. Ethan Miller, 37, sat by the window, his rough hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. His face was sharp, angular, with a light beard shading the hardened lines of his jaw. His gray-green eyes reflected the restless flicker of the fire, eyes that once scanned battlefields but now stared into nothingness. He had the solid, quiet posture of someone used to silence, his back straight even in fatigue, his motions deliberate. The scars on his forearms, barely visible beneath the sleeve of his flannel shirt, were remnants of a life he never spoke of. Once, he had led men in Afghanistan. Now, he led no one but himself and the dog sleeping by his feet. Buddy was a 7-year-old German shepherd, a large male with a black and tan coat thick as winter fur, a small scar tracing from his right ear to his cheek. His eyes, intelligent and deep amber, carried the same haunted loyalty Ethan did. The dog was more than a companion. He was Ethan's anchor to sanity. When Ethan woke from nightmares soaked in sweat, Buddy would rest his head on his chest until the shaking stopped. When the snowstorms came and the world vanished outside, Buddy would sit by the window as if guarding Ethan from ghosts only they could see. Ethan sipped his coffee, eyes fixed on the falling snow. The warmth of the mug could not reach the cold in his bones. Tonight was Thanksgiving, a holiday he once loved. He used to gather with his younger sister's family in Missoula, roast turkey, and play board games until midnight. But after the explosion that killed half his unit, including his best friend Michael, the brother he never had, he stopped answering calls. Survivor's guilt had frozen him in a world of silence, a world where laughter felt like betrayal. He stared at the old photograph pinned to the wall. Two men in desert fatigues, smiling beside a tan military dog with a dusty snout. Michael and Scout. That was before the desert heat, before the ambush, before Ethan watched Michael's eyes go dim. The guilt came like clockwork each Thanksgiving. The same night he had promised to call Michael's family, and didn't. A log cracked in the fire, jolting him from thought. Buddy's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head, muscles tightening. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" Buddy stood, tail straight, nostrils flaring. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the silence sharper. Then it came. A distant sound, faint but unnatural. Not the wind, not the shifting trees. A horn. Short. Panicked. Then nothing. Ethan froze. The wilderness around his cabin stretched for miles. No one came here without purpose. He set down his mug, reached for the parka hanging on the hook. The worn fabric smelled faintly of pine and smoke. He strapped on his flashlight, grabbed a thick blanket, and the red emergency kit he always kept by the door. Buddy barked once, sharp and urgent, pawing the door. "All right," Ethan muttered, tugging on his boots. "Let's go." The moment he stepped outside, the wind hit him like a wall. Snow whipped against his cheeks, the world a blur of white and shadow. He pulled his hood tight and followed Buddy, who bounded ahead with the ease of instinct. The dog's black fur caught bits of frost, his breath puffing in steady rhythm. Ethan's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something else, a spark of purpose, the same feeling he used to have when leading a rescue mission, before the noise, before the nightmares. They trudged through the storm for 10 minutes before Ethan noticed the slope dipping downward. The ground was slick with ice. Buddy stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the ground, tail stiff. Ethan angled his flashlight and saw faint indentations. A trail of tire marks leading off the narrow forest road. The snow had nearly covered them, meaning whatever happened was recent. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. They followed the tracks another 50 yards until the beam of his flashlight caught something metallic half buried ahead. A car door. His pulse quickened. The vehicle was a silver SUV, tilted sideways in a shallow ditch, its headlights dark, half the hood buried in snow. Ethan's boots sank to his ankles as he approached. He wiped the frost from the driver's window with a gloved hand and shone his light inside. 3 figures. A woman and two small children curled together. His stomach dropped. He banged on the glass. The woman stirred weakly, lifting her head. Her face, pale beneath the flickering beam, was framed by long, dark hair sticking to her cheeks. Early 30s, maybe younger. She had delicate features, a straight nose, full lips trembling from the cold, and eyes the color of old honey. The kind of eyes that once smiled easily, but now reflected fear and exhaustion. Her skin was pale from the cold, her lips bluish. She clutched the children close, wrapping her coat around them, though it barely covered all three. Ethan motioned for her to unlock the door. She struggled, but managed to reach the handle. The lock clicked. A rush of frigid air hit them as he pulled it open. "It's all right, ma'am," he said, kneeling. "My name's Ethan. You're safe now." The woman's voice came in ragged gasps. "The engine died. My phone. No signal. I didn't know where we were." The two children stirred, their faces red and wet with tears. A boy, maybe 5, with a knitted hat too big for his head, and a girl, around 8, holding a stuffed rabbit in one frozen hand. Buddy nudged closer, his warm breath fogging the window. The boy blinked at the dog and whispered hoarsely, "Doggy." Ethan's throat tightened. "We need to get you inside, get some heat in you." He glanced at the gas gauge. Empty. The cold was creeping in fast. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so." Her voice wavered, but held quiet determination. "I'm Sarah Collins. My kids, Lily and Noah." Ethan nodded, already wrapping the blanket around the children. Sarah's hands shook as she helped. Beneath her fear, he sensed resilience, the kind of calm that came from holding things together when everything else fell apart. Her wedding ring glinted faintly under the flashlight, but her eyes spoke of someone who had weathered more than storms. Buddy barked once and pawed at the snow, looking back toward the woods. The road home was nearly invisible. The wind screamed harder, as if urging them to move. Ethan met Sarah's eyes. "We can't stay here. My cabin's less than a mile north. We can make it if we move now." Sarah hesitated, clutching Lily. "It's too dark. What if—" "Buddy knows the way," Ethan said simply, and for a moment his voice carried the firm assurance of a man used to being obeyed. "Trust me." He took Noah into his arms, the child light and shivering, his small head resting against Ethan's shoulder. Sarah followed, holding Lily's hand. Buddy trotted ahead, tail straight, cutting a path through the snow. The forest swallowed them in white silence. Ethan's breath came in sharp bursts, his boots crunching in rhythm with the wind. He felt the old ache in his shoulder, the same spot wounded years ago. But he pushed forward. The children whimpered softly. Sarah murmured to them, her voice gentle but trembling. Then Buddy stopped again, ears pricked. He barked once, short and urgent. Ethan turned his light. The faint glint of metal caught his eye, a piece of the car's bumper sliding down the slope. The snow was shifting. A rumble echoed above them, low but growing. "Move!" Ethan shouted, spinning around. Buddy leapt back just as a wave of snow crashed down where they had stood seconds ago. The avalanche was small, but enough to bury the car entirely. Ethan's heart hammered. Sarah gasped, holding Lily tight. He looked at Buddy, his fur plastered with snow, chest rising fast, and exhaled shakily. "Good instincts, boy," he muttered, rubbing the dog's neck. The German shepherd licked his glove, tail wagging once. Ethan turned to Sarah, breath fogging the frozen air. "Let's keep going." She nodded, clutching her children. They moved again, step by step, guided by the dim glow of Ethan's flashlight and the certainty in Buddy's stride. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something more powerful than pain. Purpose. Someone needed him again. And as the wind howled through the canyon and the snow blurred the world into silver and white, Ethan whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "It's Thanksgiving, Buddy, and we're not alone anymore." The wind screamed through the canyon, tearing through the branches like a wild thing. Snow swirled in maddening circles, covering every trace of the road they had just left behind. Ethan Miller led the way, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the white chaos. His parka was stiff with frost, his breath forming clouds that vanished instantly in the cold. Behind him, Sarah struggled through the snowdrifts, clutching little Lily's hand, while Noah clung to her hip beneath the emergency blanket. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but her movements were steady. She was a woman who did not crumble when her children were watching. Sarah Collins was 32, tall and slender, her long chestnut hair now damp and clinging to her cheeks. Her dark brown eyes, though red from cold and exhaustion, burned with quiet resolve. She was the kind of woman who had learned strength not from choice, but from necessity. After her husband died in a highway accident 3 years ago, she had raised both children alone, working double shifts at a diner in Bozeman to make rent and still saving enough to buy Christmas gifts. That resilience showed now in every cautious step she took through the blizzard. "Keep close," Ethan shouted, his voice half swallowed by the wind. He glanced back and saw Sarah nod, her eyes shining faintly in the flashlight's beam. Buddy, the German shepherd, trotted ahead, his thick fur crusted with snow, nose pressed to the ground. The dog's body language was calm and alert. Even in this chaos, Buddy's training held firm. He moved like a shadow through the white, occasionally pausing to look back, ensuring everyone was still behind. As they climbed a small ridge, the snow deepened to Ethan's knees. His arms ached from carrying Noah, whose small body was limp with exhaustion. The boy was about 5, with sandy hair peeking out beneath his wool hat and cheeks flushed crimson from the cold. Every so often, Ethan would adjust his grip, whispering, "Almost there, buddy." The boy stirred slightly, murmuring, "Cold," and Ethan's heart clenched. Sarah's boots slipped on the icy incline, but she kept going, teeth gritted. Lily, 8 years old, was quieter than her brother. Her blonde hair had turned white with frost, and she held her stuffed rabbit tight under one arm, eyes fixed on Buddy's swaying tail, as if trusting it completely. When they finally reached level ground again, Ethan stopped, scanning ahead. The faint outline of the wooden bridge came into view, a narrow span crossing the frozen stream below. He cursed softly. The snow was building up fast on the planks. "We cross here," he said. "The cabin's on the other side. Maybe half a mile more." Sarah swallowed hard, staring at the bridge. The wind rattled its railings, the boards creaking under the weight of new snow. "Is it safe?" she asked. "It was last week," Ethan replied grimly, adjusting Noah on his shoulder. "But we don't have another choice." Buddy trotted forward, sniffing the bridge, then barked twice. That was his signal, clear ahead. Ethan nodded. "You heard him. Stay close." They started across. The wood moaned under their boots, and the river below gurgled faintly beneath its thin sheet of ice. Halfway across, the storm surged again, blinding snow whipping into their faces. Sarah stumbled. Ethan reached back instantly, gripping her arm. "Easy," he said. "Just a few more steps." But as he spoke, a thunderous crack split the air. The ridge above them groaned, and a massive sheet of snow slid down the mountainside, crashing onto the far end of the bridge. The way forward vanished beneath a wall of white. Sarah gasped. "We're trapped." Ethan's mind raced. He turned sharply, eyes scanning for another route. The stream below shimmered with faint light where the current still moved beneath the ice. Dangerous, but passable, if they were careful. "We're going down," he decided. "What?" "The water," Sarah began. "It's shallow," Ethan interrupted. "Frozen on top. We'll move fast." Without hesitation, he climbed down the small embankment, boots sliding on the packed snow. Buddy followed, testing the ice with his paws before stepping onto it, weight balanced. Ethan placed Noah gently on the bank and extended a hand to Sarah. "Step where I step. Don't stop." Sarah hesitated only a second before following. Her breath came in short gasps, the icy wind biting at her skin. The cold seeped through her jeans instantly, burning her calves. Buddy led the way, paws tapping a rhythm across the ice. Lily followed behind him, holding tightly to the leash Ethan had tied around her wrist. They had crossed nearly halfway when the ice gave a sudden, sharp groan. "Don't look down," Ethan ordered. But Sarah already felt the surface tremble beneath her boots. A second later, the sound came, a splintering crack that echoed like thunder. "Move!" Ethan shouted. He lunged forward, reaching for Sarah's arm. The ice split beneath them, a surge of freezing water spilling up through the fracture. Sarah slipped, her scream swallowed by the wind. Ethan grabbed her coat, dragging her upward. "Push, Sarah! Push!" Buddy barked wildly, running back toward them. He clamped his jaws on the cuff of Lily's sleeve, pulling her back from the widening hole. The girl sobbed, stumbling onto solid ground, while Ethan hauled Sarah up by sheer strength, his arms trembling with effort. She gasped, soaked, and shivering, but alive. Ethan didn't stop to breathe. He lifted Noah again, gesturing for Sarah and Lily to follow. Buddy moved ahead once more, shaking water from his fur, his breath steaming in the air. Every few steps, he glanced back, eyes burning with focus. The climb up the opposite bank felt endless. Ethan's legs burned, his fingers numb and stiff. But then, through the veil of snow, he saw it, the faint outline of the pines that marked his land. Relief surged through him. When they finally reached the crest, all four collapsed onto the snow, panting. Ethan lay on his back, chest heaving, staring up at the swirling sky. Buddy sat beside him, tongue lolling, eyes bright, as if proud of his work. Ethan turned to Sarah, who sat clutching her children, their faces pressed against her shoulders. Her hair hung in damp strands, her lips trembling, not from cold now, but from release, the kind that comes when fear finally breaks. Their eyes met, and for the first time that night, she smiled weakly. Ethan managed a faint grin. "He's always right on time, that one," he said, nodding toward Buddy. The dog tilted his head and gave a short bark, as if agreeing. And as the snow fell softly around them, covering their footprints, Ethan realized the feeling in his chest was no longer just exhaustion. It was purpose, the thing he had been missing since the war. Tonight, under the unending storm, he had found it again. By the time Ethan and the small group reached the cabin, the night had swallowed the forest whole. The snow fell in slow, heavy curtains, and the world seemed to breathe frost. Ethan pushed open the wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was freezing, the silence thick enough to hear their breaths. The cabin smelled faintly of pine resin and smoke. Old, lived in, lonely. Ethan moved quickly, his motions efficient but calm. He struck a match and lit the fire in the stone hearth. Orange light flickered across the room, chasing away shadows that had clung there for years. He hung the wet scarves and coats over a rope near the fire, then laid 2 thick blankets on the floor. "Sit close to the heat," he said quietly. "You'll warm faster that way." Sarah followed his instructions without hesitation. She lowered herself near the hearth, pulling Lily and Noah close. The children's faces glowed in the firelight, Lily's cheeks pink again, Noah's eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. Their mother looked older now, fatigue carving faint lines near her eyes. Yet there was still a quiet beauty about her, the kind that came from patience and endurance. Her long brown hair, still damp, curled at the ends, glinting like bronze in the firelight. Ethan knelt beside the hearth, feeding more wood into the flames. The fire caught strongly, filling the small cabin with the comforting pop and hiss of burning pine. Buddy lay down beside the children, his thick tail sweeping softly across the floor. His coat steamed slightly as the ice melted, and soon the big German shepherd closed his eyes, content. Noah giggled faintly and reached to touch Buddy's ear. The dog cracked one amber eye open, as if giving permission, and wagged his tail. Sarah watched, her lips curving into a fragile smile. "He's gentle," she murmured. Ethan glanced up, his expression softening. "He's a good judge of people. If Buddy likes you, you're family." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Family. The word hung between them like a ghost. Sarah's gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the mantel. 2 young men in military uniform standing side by side, smiling in the desert sun. One of them was unmistakably Ethan, younger, clean-shaven, with that proud spark soldiers carried before they learned what war took from them. "Was that—" she began. "My best friend," Ethan said, his voice quiet but steady. "Michael Turner. We served together. He didn't make it back." The silence that followed was not awkward, but heavy, with shared understanding. Sarah reached for her children, smoothing Lily's hair. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Ethan nodded once, eyes distant. When the warmth had begun to creep into the cabin, Ethan opened the small cupboard beside the sink. Inside were a few cans of beans, a half loaf of bread, and an old pumpkin pie wrapped in tin foil. He chuckled ruefully. "Not much of a feast, but it'll do." Sarah smiled faintly. "A feast isn't about food." He handed her a plate and used a pocket knife to slice the pie into 4 modest pieces. The crust was dry, the filling sweet but faintly spiced. To Ethan, it tasted like memory, of dinners long gone, of laughter and light. They ate in silence for a while, broken only by the crackle of fire and the occasional hum of the wind pressing against the windows. After they finished, Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. "You didn't have to share all this," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, I did. I think I needed this more than I thought." She studied him quietly. In the flickering light, he looked both strong and tired, like a man who had fought too many winters inside himself. His beard glinted faintly, outlining a jaw too often clenched against grief. Yet his hands, when they reached to tend the fire, were gentle. Outside, the wind suddenly rose again, howling through the trees like a wounded animal. The windows rattled violently, and the fire flickered low. Buddy leapt up, growling deep in his throat. Ethan was already on his feet, crossing the cabin in 2 strides. He peered out through the frosted glass and saw a massive pine branch swaying dangerously close to the roof. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his coat and gloves. Sarah started to protest, but one look at his eyes, calm, unflinching, stopped her. "I'll be right back." He opened the door, and a blast of cold hit the room. Buddy darted out after him, barking sharply. Ethan squinted through the storm, the snow slashing his face. The branch creaked ominously, its weight pulling at the trunk. If it fell, the cabin's roof would collapse. He grabbed the hatchet by the woodpile and moved forward. "Buddy, light," he called, a command voice left over from old training. Buddy darted ahead, circling the tree, his fur bristling. He barked once, Ethan's cue. The man swung the hatchet, striking the base of the branch where it met the trunk. It cracked, splintered, and fell harmlessly to the side. Ethan exhaled, his breath visible like smoke. "Good boy," he said, kneeling to pat Buddy's neck. The dog licked his face, tail thumping against his leg. When they re-entered the cabin, Sarah had both children pressed against her, eyes wide. Relief washed across her face as she saw them safe. "Is it over?" "For now," Ethan said, closing the door behind him. He stomped the snow from his boots, hung his coat, and knelt by the fire again, coaxing it back to life. The flames rose, warm and steady, painting the walls gold. They gathered around once more. Sarah tucked her children beneath the blankets, whispering a small prayer of thanks. Ethan leaned back against the hearth, Buddy resting his head on his knee. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like home. Ethan looked at the small family beside him, their faces bathed in amber light, and said softly, "Now this feels like Thanksgiving." Morning came gently, wrapped in a hush of white. Snow blanketed the forest in silence, turning the world outside Ethan's cabin into a frozen cathedral. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and pale light filtered through the frosted windows. Sarah awoke first. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Buddy curled at the foot of the children's bedroll, his big frame rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The German shepherd's nose twitched, his muzzle dusted with frost, yet he hadn't moved all night, keeping watch. Sarah smiled faintly and reached out to stroke his head. His ears flicked, but he stayed still, a silent sentinel. Ethan was already outside when she rose, the rhythmic scrape of his shovel breaking the quiet. Through the window, she watched him clear the porch and path, his movements sure and economical. The early light cut across his figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a worn parka with a gray beanie pulled low over his forehead. His beard caught the light, and the breath that escaped his lips rose like steam. He looked like a man built for winter, carved by solitude, yet softened by purpose. Sarah dressed quietly, pulling on Ethan's spare flannel shirt that hung loose on her small frame. She was slim and graceful, her movements careful not to wake the children. Her face in the morning light showed the exhaustion of the past days, but also something softer, peace. She found a small tin of coffee on the shelf and used the coal stove to heat water, filling the cabin with the earthy, comforting aroma. When Ethan came in, stamping the snow from his boots, the smell stopped him at the door. "You made coffee?" he asked, surprised. Sarah smiled. "You had it hidden behind the flour. Veterans never lose their instincts for rations." He laughed, the sound low and genuine. "Guilty." He set his shovel aside and hung his gloves by the fire. Buddy trotted over to him, tail thumping, and Ethan knelt to rub his neck. "Hey, Buddy, you did good last night. You earned your breakfast." The dog responded with a happy rumble and leaned into his touch. They sat around the small wooden table, Ethan, Sarah, Lily, and Noah. The children were brighter now, their cheeks flushed with life. Lily chattered softly about Buddy, while Noah carefully held a mug of warm milk Ethan had made from powdered creamer. The man listened, smiling with quiet amusement. As they ate, Sarah began to talk. "We were driving from Missoula to Bozeman," she said. "My parents still live on the farm. Every Thanksgiving, they call it the one day they expect everyone home. I didn't want to disappoint them." Her eyes clouded for a moment. "After my husband died, I promised I'd keep that tradition for the kids." Ethan nodded. "Tradition keeps you grounded," he said. His voice carried that deep, measured tone of someone who'd learned the value of routine when everything else fell apart. He looked down at his hands. "Michael, my best friend, he used to say Thanksgiving was the only holiday that made sense. No gifts, just gratitude." Sarah looked at him, her gaze warm. "Did you ever visit his family after?" Ethan shook his head. "Couldn't bring myself to. I told myself I'd only remind them of what they lost." For a long moment, neither spoke. The children's laughter filled the silence, light and unburdened. Then Sarah said softly, "Maybe you reminded them of what they had, the kind of courage most people never know." Her words lingered like a small flame in the room. Ethan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both gratitude and pain. "Maybe," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe Buddy knew that before I did." The dog raised his head at his name, as if agreeing. Suddenly, a burst of static crackled from the old battery-powered radio on the shelf. Everyone froze. Ethan turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. He crossed the room and adjusted the antenna. For weeks, it had been nothing but silence. Then a voice came through, faint, distorted, but clear enough. "This is Search and Rescue, Bozeman Division. Copy if anyone can hear. We are looking for a missing vehicle near Pine Ridge. Family of 3, mother and 2 minors. Please respond if this signal reaches you." Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ethan grabbed the radio microphone, pressing the button. "This is Ethan Miller, North Ridge of Pine Creek. I found them. They're safe. Repeat, they're safe." The voice crackled again. "Copy that, Miller. Hold position. We've got your coordinates. Helicopters on the way." The children jumped up, eyes wide with excitement. Buddy barked and ran in circles, his energy contagious. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something close to relief. For the first time in years, someone was coming for him, not just for others. Minutes later, the distant thrum of rotor blades reached their ears. Ethan stepped outside, shielding his eyes as the helicopter cut through the pale morning sky. Snow whipped around him in a swirling halo. He waved one arm high, Buddy barking beside him. Sarah appeared at the door, holding Lily and Noah close. Her face was bright with tears. When the helicopter began to descend in the clearing, Ethan turned back. Sarah stood in the doorway, hair tousled by wind, her dark eyes shining. She reached out and took his hand. "You saved our lives," she said, her voice trembling. "You gave my children a future to remember." Ethan looked down at her hand in his, calloused fingers brushing hers gently. "I think you all saved mine too," he said quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Come with us. My family will want to thank you. Stay for dinner, for Thanksgiving." Ethan glanced at Buddy, who looked up at him with those amber eyes full of intelligence and trust. A smile tugged at his lips. "If he's invited," he said, "then I'm coming." And as the helicopter's wind whipped snow around them, for the first time in many years, Ethan felt something warm settle in his heart. Belonging. The helicopter touched down gently on the outskirts of Bozeman. The afternoon sun, breaking through clouds that had spent 2 days cloaking the world in white. The small Montana town looked like something from a postcard. Chimneys breathing thin trails of smoke, rooftops glittering with fresh snow, and the faint echo of church bells carried on the crisp air. When the doors slid open, the rush of wind mingled with tears and laughter. Sarah was the first to step out, her hair tossed by the downdraft, cheeks flushed from cold and emotion. Waiting at the landing zone were her parents, William and Margaret Collins, both in their late 60s, wrapped in thick coats and scarves. William was a broad man with silver hair and deep-set blue eyes, his face weathered from decades of farming under the Montana sun. His hands, cracked but strong, trembled slightly as he reached for his daughter. Margaret, slender with a kind, lined face and soft gray curls tucked beneath a knitted hat, clung to him as though afraid the vision before her might vanish. "Sarah!" her mother cried, running forward. The embrace that followed was fierce, wordless, a soundless collision of relief and love. William pulled the children into his arms, holding them tightly against his chest. Lily giggled through tears, while Noah hid his face in his grandfather's coat, his small body shaking from warmth and joy rather than cold. When the flurry of reunion settled, Sarah turned to Ethan, who stood a few feet away, uncertain. His parka was still dusted with snow, and Buddy sat obediently beside him, ears perked. The dog's fur gleamed bronze and black in the fading light, his amber eyes scanning the new surroundings with calm vigilance. Ethan shifted awkwardly, unused to being the center of attention. William noticed and walked over. "You must be the man who found my girl," he said, his voice deep and sincere. Ethan nodded, extending a gloved hand. "Ethan Miller, sir." The old farmer shook it firmly, his grip strong. "You brought them home," he said simply. "That makes you family." Ethan's throat tightened at the word. He had been called many things in life: soldier, sergeant, veteran. But family had been foreign to him for far too long. Margaret crouched to pet Buddy, who leaned forward to sniff her gloved fingers before licking them gently. "And you, sweetheart," she said with a laugh. "You must be the real hero." Buddy's tail thumped the snow, his mouth opening in what looked like a grin. They insisted Ethan and Buddy join them for dinner. The family home stood at the edge of town, a large wooden farmhouse surrounded by birch trees and a white picket fence. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney as they approached, the golden light inside glowing like a promise against the falling dusk. When they entered, the scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and baked pumpkin filled the air. Ethan stopped in the doorway, momentarily overcome by the warmth and familiarity, the sound of laughter, the clinking of dishes, the murmur of life. He had forgotten what it felt like. Sarah's father motioned to the head of the long oak table. "Sit, son," he said. "You've earned that seat." Ethan hesitated, then took it. Buddy settled by his feet, resting his head on his paws. Lily slipped off her chair to sit beside the dog, wrapping her small arms around his neck. He stayed perfectly still, tail wagging lightly, as though he understood he was part of this family now. As everyone gathered, Margaret placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're home here tonight," she said softly. Dinner began with the quiet rustle of hands joining across the table. The flicker of candlelight danced over faces full of gratitude. Sarah raised her glass of cider, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "This Thanksgiving, I give thanks for life, for family, and for the man and his dog, who reminded us that kindness is never lost in the storm." Ethan felt the weight of emotion pressing at his chest. When it was his turn, he spoke slowly, his voice low but steady. "I used to think Thanksgiving was for people who already had everything: family, warmth, a reason to smile. I didn't realize it's for people who thought they'd lost it all, too." His gaze fell on Buddy, then on the smiling faces around him. "It's for anyone who still believes in sharing." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the sound of snow tapping the window. Then applause erupted, gentle, heartfelt. Buddy barked once, a short, happy sound that made everyone laugh. Later, when plates were empty and the house hummed with quiet contentment, Sarah found Ethan standing near the window. Outside, snow was falling again, the world glowing silver beneath the lamplight. She stepped beside him, her voice soft. "You know," she said, "if you ever need somewhere to spend the holidays again, we'd be honored." Ethan looked at her, then at Buddy sleeping peacefully by the fire, his ears twitching in some pleasant dream. "I think," he said slowly, "we've already found where we belong." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. From outside, the church bell began to ring. 3 slow tones that carried through the cold air like a benediction. Ethan reached down to rest his hand on Buddy's head. The dog stirred, opening one sleepy amber eye, and wagged his tail once against the floorboards. "Not alone anymore, old boy," Ethan murmured. Buddy gave a quiet, approving huff, then closed his eyes again. Snow whispered against the glass, and somewhere in the distance, laughter floated through the night. A sound of peace, of home, and of hearts finally healed. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, like a loyal dog waiting by your side, or a stranger who shows up when hope seems gone. Ethan and Buddy's story reminds us that God's grace often walks among us in the form of kindness, courage, and second chances. In our own lives, we may face storms, loneliness, loss, or fear. But just like in that snowy night in Montana, light will always find its way through the cold. When we open our hearts to others, we become the miracle someone has been praying for. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, warmth, and faith this Thanksgiving and always. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below with what you're thankful for today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that together we can keep spreading stories of faith, hope, and love. May the Lord watch over every soul who listens, every home that opens its heart, and every kind hand that reaches out in compassion.